Good evening and welcome to the forum being hosted by the Regional Mission Council of the United Church in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. And I am delighted to have our guests on with us this evening, Rev Donovan Myers, the minister for the John Gray Memorial Church in West Bay, and Mr. Woody Foster. And Woody, I'm just going to highlight a few of the hats that you wear this evening. Certainly managing director of our Foster's Food Fair Stores, board of directors of Foster's Group, which is a number of local companies, on the board of CUC, on the board of R3, the new foundation that's really looking at the whole recovery process. But two of these bits stand out as well for me, and that is your long-standing engagement and creation of, as chairman of Life, literacy is for everyone. And I know how near and dear that is to you, as well as being president of the Cayman Food Bank. So I highlight those because I like to invite you to sort of occasionally change hats as you share throughout this forum with us. And to you, Dr. Bodden, I'm delighted to have you here, Alexandra. And you come to us as one of our own that we're so proud of, a young doctoral level psychologist, and really with a fabulous clinic on course, which is a really exciting opportunity in the times for Cayman, with a mental health facility which offers a full range of services, and which, having listened to your Radio Cayman interview, I'm excited about the kind of learnings and insights you'll bring this afternoon as we begin to look at COVID-19 then and now. And before we begin, I would invite Reverend Myers to lead us in a word of prayer to set the context for this forum.
I invite you to pray with me. God of all seasons, we thank you that you have placed us in community with our sisters and brothers to enjoy your gifts to us, to learn how to be neighbor, and to live into the experience of what it means to be part of your family. Please accept now the offering of all of us who speak and of all who will engage by listening and widening the conversation. May the small contribution we make help to bring about your kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.
Amen. Back in early March, who could have told us? We would never have believed it. But I want us to sort of set a context here for a word that's become so commonplace to the tiniest child around the globe, COVID-19. Going into the lockdown, did you expect, what do you think were some of the things that we'd be facing? And I look at you, Alexander, to kind of move into that. What do you think were some of the things we'd be facing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, so much has happened, and I'm not gonna lie, it felt kind of like an apocalypse movie. I was quite nervous myself personally going into it, but obviously from a mental health perspective, there was a wide range of concerns that come up, not only with a health scare like this, with this pandemic. Viruses are things you can't see, you can't tell, you don't know who has it. You pass it on to your loved ones even if you don't know you have it. There's a lot of anxiety-provoking situations that can come from that. So that was something obviously on our radar as mental health professionals. Likewise, when the government had to step in to put in the restrictions for our safety, humans are not very good with things that are out of their control. And so that as well brought up a lot of its own difficulties. The restrictions that were imposed on us, having to adjust to working at home, schooling from home, and dealing with everyday life in a much different way very quickly. So there was a lot of stressors that people in my field were anticipating and looking out for.
I think I pick up on the uncertainty of that because I think on a personal level, like everybody else, you just didn't know what to expect. I mean, none of us alive have lived through anything like this. Perhaps for us in Cayman, the nearest kind of crisis thing is Ivan. Yeah, you know, Ivan has become the kind of modern way of speaking about the before Ivan and after. And so even with that, I think for me personally, and think maybe for many persons maybe, we went into it thinking that somehow, with not knowing what it is, never having been there before, that it might just be something that will pass soon. But found out very quickly afterwards that it didn't have that kind of fleeting or transitory nature. You know, unlike a hurricane, when it's done, then it's about, okay, how do you put back the tarp on the roof and then get the shingles on and then get stuff together and clean up and so on. It becomes now not only a way of life for such a protracted period, but we are recognizing and still haven't figured out exactly how it is going to change life going forward. So I think that for me was a big piece.
What if from a business perspective and a number of hats that you're wearing, what do you think were some of the issues we would face as a community?
I think like everybody else, if I were completely honest, I had no idea. In my opinion, anybody that told you different is more than likely not being completely honest with themselves. Maybe you put it politically correctly that way. I guess if I could put it this way, from an ordering standpoint, we always, because we live on an island, we always try to order, say, you know, we're not a wholesaler, we're a retailer, right? So we try to bring in, let's call it on average 2 weeks supply of anything. If the boat is late, we're not completely out of business, right? Except for things like perishables, which you have to be careful on because of their dating. So, I mean, we were telling ourselves, you know, let's increase our ordering, let's say to 3 or 4 weeks, just so, you know, if anything happens, that we have a cushion. So those are kind of what we were talking about. And so going into the, you know, prior to the lockdown, when sales got like really busy and everybody was starting to panic, really for us then, you weren't really in a position to think about what was coming because you were just simply too busy. So our orderers were asking questions like, well, what should we do? How much should we order? It's like, I don't know, 3 to 4 weeks, and just keep going. And then as things didn't settle down, it just kept going. And then we started having pressure from our suppliers saying, I can't deliver this product. It then went into, for us, crisis mode of, listen, just order whatever you can get from wherever you can get it, and ask people if they know other places that we're not already buying where we can get it from. So we just started just going anywhere and doing everything. So to answer your question, we really didn't have an idea of what we needed to do. We, as a group, so not just from Foster's, but our car companies and some, we started talking about, well, again, how do we need to protect our staff? What do we need to think about if the pandemic is coming? What do we do with healthcare and giving people time off and these type of things? And when we look at the contingency plan that we put in place, it was woefully inadequate in terms of what we needed to do. So as time sort of marched on and there was the reality of people actually having a positive case and how you needed to take care of your employees, we didn't have a good enough plan because, in complete honesty, we didn't know what to expect. So we just threw something at it and hoped it was good enough, but it wasn't. So I think the value in that is that you could watch evolution happen before your eyes, as opposed to looking back at it and say, wow, you just watched it happen. So you make a decision in the morning and by that evening you had to change your thinking. It was that fast. So it was really, well, continues to be, it's not as crazy as it was, but it was, those first 2 months were extremely difficult.
One of the questions I was going to ask, but I think you've really answered that, Woody, is how easy it was to pivot all those business sects you're in. And the truth is, it wasn't, but you just had to jump in and do, because it was, as you used a really good word, I thought, and that was that it was evolution happening before your eyes. And morning and evening could be a totally different perspective, purely by virtue of what was going on around you. Now, I'm going to pose this question more to you, Reverend Myers, and to you, Alex, but certainly invite you, Woody, to pop in as you wish. But to the two of you, what were some of the general observations about how people were adjusting? from your perspective, your congregation, and certainly the extended community in West Bay where you have the parsonage and the church, what have you, and Alex, certainly from the kind of work that you're involved in. So Rev, what was that like? What were your observations?
If I were to borrow from what is word, that evolutionary thing is like drinking from a fire hose. And I think people were all feeling that kind of experience. And so people were overwhelmed. And for me, that I think became very much part and parcel in everybody's individual life and sphere. There was a sense of that. And the overwhelm came also in the pieces of loss. I think tremendously around loss, because people were in personal distress in some cases, having lost maybe job or income, some extent. Certainly the loss of movement or the ability to freely interact was another piece of the loss that they were feeling, and a sense of isolation, forced, albeit, and maybe it worked for some people who perhaps that fed into who their personalities and the things that they deal with. It's a great place to be, but also people are overwhelmed by the new expectations. To be home, to be a teacher, to homeschool your child, to work from home. Of course, all of the economic uncertainties. And so in my experience, I saw that on the micro level, where people were looking for answers. People are looking, and the easier answers, to be fair, were where we could offer a little bit of assistance with this or that to make for the dinner or some other kind of provision. The more difficult part of it has been to give people a sense of normalcy, a sense of, it's going to be okay. And I think that was another part of what I saw a lot of wanting to hear, where are we and where are we going and what's going to happen, those kinds of questions.
Alex?
Yeah, I think when everything initially happened, we were anticipating, honestly, being flooded with calls and clients, and it was a lot different as well than what we had anticipated too. I think that the first couple of weeks there was so much going on that we didn't see this huge influx of clients that we were anticipating. What we actually saw was a few weeks afterwards. I think once people kind of figured out the homeschooling and how to work from home and kind of settled into the new routines, and the initial shock and initial crisis response was over, and things kind of set in, just that the world's not going to be the same, was when we saw more and more people coming in. And for a variety of different reasons at that stage as well. A lot of difficulties with people who are at home alone, and being very isolated and feeling very alone going through this. We had a lot of students come back, and so that was a lot of the people I saw was young adults who are coming back and living at home, and everyone's in the house, right? So they got the other side of concerns where, you've now got 7 adults staying in the home that haven't lived together in 3 or 4 years, and how does that work? And so a lot of difficulties with the stress of not knowing what's going to happen, dealing with all the added responsibilities that Reverend Myers was talking about, and trying to figure out how to make it work. And I think a lot of the parents that I spoke with as well were really beating themselves up over not being able to be teacher and mom and business employer and managing all of their jobs from the house with internet that keeps giving out, on one screen computer. So, there was huge adjustments that had to be made, but that's what we saw, as as it came in and the reality kind of settled in, then that's when we saw more people reaching out for help. And I think it's hard in the thick of things. And this is something, as Dr. Clem was talking about, that they saw similar in mental health with Ivan, was that the initial shock kind of hits, and then afterwards is when you tend to see more of the mental health concerns playing out.
At a sociological level, though, Angela, I think the sense of, I think people were now in a place of trying to, found themselves in a dilemma, maybe. A dilemma as to how would all that is happening impact the decisions that they needed to make. So it might have been even at some very small level, trying to balance between self-interest and the good of community, So you would know about this now, people who felt that I needed to secure for my family, just as though you were thinking about the whole community to, you know, how do I get enough food for everybody to eat? But I am thinking, how do I make sure that I have enough in my cupboard? And therefore, you know, what that meant to panic buying and hoarding versus, you know, what we're hearing people say, hey, leave an extra roll of toilet paper there for somebody else, kind of thing. So there's that sense of a balance between self and the common good, you know, the group, the interests of the group. And I also saw too, maybe as the dilemma going into the era of people wanting or having to maybe even suspend some of their personal values. Things, you know, ways in which they would have acted outside of this kind of a crisis. They probably were finding themselves having to or choosing to act in those new ways. Perhaps even you talk about members of family having to live together, but maybe even outside of family groups or other people who went into living arrangements that would normally not have engaged that kind of an arrangement. And of course, all the attendant issues that come along with that.
Our situation was different in that our staff had to come to work. So they were balancing what they were going to do with their children while they went into a very uncertain situation of they are in the lion's mouth, if you will, in terms of potential to get sick. So while they were thankful for a job because their neighbor didn't have one and they did, however, they're at the most risk of potentially catching the virus. So we had a lot of situations where they were having to juggle, do I want to go to work or don't I? I mean, we have a lot of staff who are elderly or who have autoimmune deficiencies or whatever. So it became really interesting. And like I said, that's now where we had to change our sort of thinking in terms of how do we protect our staff in terms of balancing. Well, listen, we need you to come to work, but we can't put you in the face of danger. So elderly or autoimmune deficiencies or pregnant or those situations, we were having to juggle those. So there was a whole raft of emotions going through the whole community in terms of how do I deal with not having a job? Equally, how do I deal with having a job? Because now I'm in the face of danger. So there's everything going on. It was interesting. It's a crazy time.
Meanwhile, they have to explain to people, no, you alone can't buy all the toilet paper in Price Right.
Yeah, well, we still yet to figure out what that's all about. Anyway.
I think what I'm hearing is our words around an evolving situation, the uncertainty of it all. A key interesting one, Alexandra, is 7 adults living back in a family home, but they've not lived together in an X number of years, and how to sustain, employ a workforce where that issue of my personal health, I need a job, and how does this work, was really something that in your case, what you were seeing quite intimately. We have been over the last couple of weeks. Perhaps the word is further evolution. We are emerging from the pandemic. In this coming out, what are, again, if y'all would just share some of your observations as we're coming out, because we were overwhelmed and uncertain and perhaps even a little crazy-ish, but in the coming out, what are you seeing now in the coming out?
I guess I'm struggling to say that we're coming out because I'm not entirely sure where we are. You know, we're having to plan for what's next with no real roadmap of what is next. Because even if you look at around the world in terms of what others are doing, there's such a huge range of what people are doing. Some are making what seems to be good decisions, some are making what seems to be bad decisions, but you don't really know at the end of the day, right? So there's still the concern of a resurgence. I mean, Cayman didn't really have one, so we can't see a second wave in our context, but if America gets a second wave and we open up our borders, you know, sort of what happens. So, you know, we're making plans for things that are, you know, back to school. We're making plans for Black Friday. I mean, how do we make plans for our business not knowing whether the borders will be open. Even if they are open, is anybody going to come? Is there going to be a second wave? Are we still going to have social distancing, not going to have social distancing? It's really difficult to plan, but if you don't plan, you have a problem, right? Because again, we live on an island. It's not as if we can just order from around the corner. We have to plan in order to get things. So, you know, it's really difficult. When I look at, you know, you mentioned in your sort of lead up into how we were going to move forward, and you talked about education. How do we get new teachers in terms of starting to plan for that scenario, right? There's a whole work permit issue and getting people here. And are they going to have to quarantine, and who's going to pay for the quarantine? And do they go to a hotel, or do they have to shelter in place? There's just so many decisions. So while in this surreal situation of it feeling as if we're coming out of it, because largely everybody has been asymptomatic, there's been really no sickness. Government has spent a gazillion dollars on preparing for a pandemic that really never came. So it would seem as if we should just get back to work, get the local economy going, and let's get on with it, while you're having to consider this enemy that you can't see, that could be lurking around the corner, but you don't really know. So I struggle with we're coming out of it. I don't know. It's a very difficult time.
So you've raised an interesting point that I want to invite Rev and Alexandra to react to, because we're using these expressions, opening up our community. Why is it that, for example, Jamaica's open to tourists next week, next month, and here we are, we're not opened yet? I mean, there's all of this, because everyone on every cell phone has the entire world's news on it. So I think you have a very interesting point. Are we opening up, and where are we along the continuum? But Rev, you want to add to, some more to that thinking? Are we opening up?
I think I'm at the same place.
Are we coming out?
Are we coming out? Yeah. Who am I to say that? I really don't know. I concur that we don't seem to have had the kind of a hit that we were expecting and fearing, at least the level that we were. And thank God that has not been the case. But the point is that we really don't know. And I think what is for me a part of the challenge of that is what is a savior in the whole midst. It's social distancing. So social distancing is what we can credit for having, kind of stemmed the virus and kept it at bay to some extent, and not seeing the kinds of transmission and so on. But at the same time, it goes so much against who we are as human beings. Against this kind of sense of us as kind of people who just want to be around each other, and especially as people who are within our community and with our heritage, are people who have kind of certain kind of ethical norms around being our neighbor's keeper and being close with each other, and therefore all of these kind of sensibilities. So instinctively. It doesn't fit with what we've been asked to do, and so here we are now in this, whatever is happening, whatever is the next phase, we're going to have to be figuring out how do we move in a way that helps us recover and get back some of that, but at the same time, wanting to make sure that we're not going to be too crazy about it and so on. So it changes so much about us. And it really has to lead us into a kind of a reimagination of our own moral sensibilities. Not that we don't reach out, but how do we do so in a way that doesn't have the kind of non-contact, or which is a non-contact way rather, but somehow it still maintains the community. And I think for me, whatever is the next step is that challenge to who we are as community and how we understand ourselves.
Alex?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what you said there, Reverend Myers. I think that this is going to affect our socialization and the way we interact with others going forward. You know, we've now spent, you know, 2 months of learning not to touch people, not to breathe on people, staying 6 feet apart. And it creates a sense of anxiety when we are, or stress when we are around people. We no longer know how to act or what's okay to act. And then there's the fear in the back of our mind that we get sick, or we might make a loved one, especially an older one, sick. And so there's all these things that are going through our minds every time. I don't know if you guys have done it. I do this funny little dance when I see people. I go to hug them, then remember I'm not supposed to, and you got to kind of try to figure it out. And so I think that, you know, things aren't going to bounce right back to how they were. We still have to be careful and still be mindful, as Reverend Myers and Mr. Woody said. And so I think it's going to take a while for us to get through this and figure it out. I also think that there's a lot of confusion now. Before it was very clear, you know, no one goes anywhere for a while. Then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, you can do X, Y, Z. The restrictions change so often that it's hard to know exactly what you can do, what you can't do. And so I think there's confusion logistically for some of that part, trying to make sure you're doing the right thing, like most of us want to do. But then I think also socially and emotionally, there's going to be this this having to figure out how to move through this and how to reconnect with people as well, once we are allowed to be around them again.
Well,
So.
and life hasn't stopped. I mean, people are still passing away. People are still getting sick with cancer and other things. In fact, we've lost 2 employees in the last couple of 2-3 weeks, and I know this is a really stupid thing to say, but this is a terrible time to die, because you can't grieve with your loved ones the way that you normally would. I mean, I've had 2 Zoom funerals. How do you go to a Zoom funeral? I mean, crazy. But we are where we are.
The new normal. And I think that is something that I just want to sort of put that out there, because for many, it's, I just want to get back to the way things were. What do you see ahead? Is that going to happen? Are we going to go back to the way things were? Or how has this really changed the world as we know it here in Cayman? I'm not really looking global enough, but here in Cayman, just invite you to react to that.
If I jump in first, you know, one of the things that has been very clear to me is that we can either see it as interruption or disruption. Interruption is when something kind of gets a blip on the screen, you flicker, and it comes back after a short while. Nothing really changes. Disruption really talks about really transforming the space, and disruption doesn't have to be negative. I mean, it probably is intrinsically negative, but it has that benefit, a potential benefit of helping us to re-engage, or to reframe, or to any of those kind of rewords, kind of get back to this piece. And for me, I think a part of one of the things, and this is the one I will offer, is humility. Maybe of all the things that have happened to us in recent times in our world, this is one of them that really, it goes back to the point we started, or how we started the conversation, that makes us scratch our head and say we really don't know. Even the brightest minds who are working diligent and around the clock trying to figure out all the moving pieces, they come up with their best guesstimates this morning, and this evening they're kind of revising, and tomorrow morning coming up with something different. Is that sense of humility, which I think maybe modern people have kind of lost, maybe because of all the advancements that we've had, and the last decade, century or so on, which has just brought so many, great strides for humanity. And we live in this space where I think we have developed a sense of we can do anything. And I think that's a good thing, and a good truism to have, and good to use to motivate our kids and so on. But there's a sense in which we come back to a place to say that, hey, we really don't know everything, and we really don't have control over everything, and just coming back to that space of humility. Don't know what that looks like, but that's something that I see.
Yeah. Well, I saw a Facebook post the other day, so forgive me for quoting social media. I guess I'm showing my age now. And it's Facebook, so that ages me too. Yeah. But it says that we should decide what part of normal it is that we're rushing back to. And that was something that really stood out to me. Whenever I work with clients, I always encourage them to see difficulties or challenges as opportunities, right? Being a believer as well, I do believe things happen for a reason. And I think that there was things that weren't working necessarily for us before. And so this is an opportunity for us to really reassess the priorities that we have in our life and our values and what that looks like individually, in a family, in the community, and what we want to bring back in. And so I think that there are some things, I think that there's actually been some really interesting developments that have come from all of the restrictions and the lockdown that I'm hoping will continue when we get out of this, as well as what Reverend Myers said, I think some important lessons as well. I think I agree that humans are quite headstrong and think that we can do and fix and anything. But the reality is that some things are out of our control, and that we do have to learn to deal with that and to deal with things that are unexpected, and to carry on. Essentially, the community is going to be going, the world is going to be going through a grieving process of the loss of the old normal, while we are trying to figure out what the new normal is on a day-to-day basis, as Mr. Foster said, because it is changing, it is growing, but I think that taking an active part in forming what we want the new normal to be and picking what we return to would be my message.
I think life is like water. It finds its level.
Yeah.
And it rises and falls depending on what's going on. I mean, we saw after Ivan how Cayman came together as a country to deal with it, in, to use your word, humility and humanity. Neighbor was helping neighbor, and everything was amazing for, I don't remember how long the period was, but let's call it 6 months to a year. It was phenomenal. Everybody was getting along and doing what they needed to do to help their brother. And as soon as things started to get back to normal, then it started to drift back to kind of how it was before. So, I believe that right now, gives you an opportunity to reflect on what's important and what's not important, and what do you need and what don't you need. And it's really easy to do that because you're in the fire and you have no option. You have to survive. So you'll do what you need to do. But as time marches on and we do get back to normal, in my opinion, things will drift back generally to how they were with changes. I mean, if you look at technology right now, the whole world is living by Zoom, as we are right now. I mean, we talked about Zoom funerals, and our kids are going to school by Zoom, or whether it's Teams or Zoom or whatever medium it is that you're using. Everybody's coming to grips with it. And I'm hearing a lot of, oh, this is going to kill business travel. Everybody's is, why go through the expense, and why, this is so much more efficient instead of taking 3 days to do a meeting because you have to travel and go out to dinner. And now the meeting's done in an hour and a half. Look how much money you've saved. Yeah, but there's no relationship through this screen, right? So you can't build relationships, and a lot of business and church and everything is built on relationships.
Absolutely.
So in my opinion, we'll get better at technology and we'll harness it for what is good for, but we'll start drifting back towards relationships, hugging people again and shaking hands and doing all of those things that right now we just simply can't do. I mean, it's my mom's birthday today, and what are we gonna do? I wasn't even able to give her a hug today. I mean, that's just crazy.
Woody, somebody referenced Reverend Myers. Somebody referenced Ivan, and immediately I sort of went back to that. Buildings were damaged, and I remember because I was chairman of the recovery operations. The focus was on Georgetown, getting Georgetown back operational, but nobody lost a job. Everybody could go back into Foster's or Kirk's or wherever, into the banks and the law firms, and just go straight back to work. The Chambers did that economic impact survey, and I was numbed out by a minimum of 14,150 jobs are at risk, is one of the points made in that report. I raise that because we have the kinds of emotional, psychological issues that Alexandra and and Reverend Myers are talking about, that is affecting every single one of us. But wearing your hat as chair of the chamber, you're equally, I would almost want to venture, burdened by the impact on job loss and therefore impact on the economy. You want to talk a little bit about that, to put that sort of in the context?
That was a huge burden, because again, when I'm talking about, you know, our family business or group of businesses, I mean, we have to just shoulder that responsibility as a family. But from a chamber's perspective, it's other people's families and other people's businesses and their employees that, in terms of going into meetings with government or other people in terms of trying to figure out what to do, you know, you always ask yourself, are you doing enough? Are you working hard enough? How do we, you know, deal with the magnitude of this problem, knowing that, you know, as we got through March and into April and seeing that this thing wasn't going away anytime soon, it's like, oh my God, I mean, excuse me, a lot of businesses could go under, and thus people could lose their jobs. So whether you're looking at it from a business standpoint of losing your business or an employee standpoint of being out of a job, you then start to wonder, how are we going to manage this? What needs to be done if we're closing our borders and there's nobody coming from the outside bringing those dollars that keep this economy moving? Wow, what are we going to do? And it's still a huge burden, because at the end of the day, the government's job, well, I think it's two jobs. One, first and foremost, is to keep us all healthy and alive, right? So that was, I said, you know, in some meeting back in March, the best case scenario would be is that sort of nothing happens and everybody gets the opportunity to go back and say that the premier was overzealous and did too much, and, you know, and criticizing for doing too much. And somebody says, that's the best case scenario. I said, yeah, we're all healthy and we're all alive. So it's easy now to go back and criticize that he should have done this, that, or the other. But if the pandemic came, obviously he made good choices, right? But well, he and his team, I shouldn't say him, it wasn't completely on his shoulders, but from a chamber perspective, looking at those numbers, it's just, wow, it's overwhelming. And then you then have to ask yourself, how are we all collectively going to get through this? Because that is a lot of mouths to feed, to keep healthy. How are we going to do that? Thankfully, we've all been healthy, so it's been easier. At least you didn't have to deal with what Italy had to deal with in Spain and New York. We didn't have that mess to deal with, thank goodness. But the financial burden is Herculean, and I don't think we've really seen the face of that. I mean, a lot have, but in terms of as a nation and to really feel it, I think we still have some ways to go on that yet.
Yeah. Rev, I think I see you. Alex?
I was going to add to that it's the longer term consequences that are concerning me as well. I think, you know, I mean, with opening back up, people are having to go back to work, you know, trying to figure out how that's going to work. Kids getting back into school in September, having been on break for, you know, 5 or 6 months. It's always hard after the 2 months of separating from mom and dad and family and getting back into school and studying, you know, plus having had these months where they were studying on their own. And I think the job loss and the financial stress, I think there's still a lot of things that are going to hit in the next few weeks and the next few months that people are going to have to deal with. So I think those kinds of stressors are going to be, they're not the immediate ones, they're the longer term ones, and ones that I think are going to affect a lot of individuals and families and the community as a whole. So that's something definitely on my radar, for helping people understand and hopefully connect with resources to be able to work through.
I think one of the things that's going to be something to be considered, certainly by those whose role it is to make kind of economic policies and so on, is is to understand how, albeit that this has been, as we said, unprecedented, how much this crisis has exposed the unpreparedness of the individual, of the average person for crisis, a hit to their economics. They talk about having, what, 3 to 6 months kind of money to live off of, and so on. And how many persons were able to have that, that part of the population that wasn't able to find that kind of a buffer. And certainly, especially since this is probably has lasted much longer than we thought it would be.
Mhm.
And of course, even organizations, churches and so on, things like reserves and so on, government and reserves, and their ability to then take care of the rest of the community. So I think it's exposing some of those things and asking us to look again, because I think one of the things that it feeds into is the whole conversation around living wage. That has been a conversation all along, and perhaps we have not been as focused on in a while. But it must be something that is spoken about, because when you think about the persons who are affected most, are those persons who who probably work as long as anybody else, and as diligently and as hard as anybody else, but do not have that kind of a buffer and support that helps them to cushion in these kinds of crises.
That's an interesting point, Rev. And when I look back at the Chamber survey as well, the very basic, I use that word, basic point that it makes is that it really was people with the lowest salaries who really make up the bulk of, and in fact, they looked at two sectors, construction and tourism, and that's where the 14,000 came from, which both of those shut as soon as this pandemic came into fore. And so what we have is, we have a very large population of individuals, families, that to your point, are absolutely unable to help themselves, and therefore, so in the kind of context that we are engaging here in recognizing the further uncertainty that exists, is how will we be able to respond proactively. And there's the issue of employment, yes, but there's also the issue, the mental health issues. How do we come out of this where our people are better prepared for crisis by virtue of a couple things that we think need to be done? And so I'd like to invite each of you to offer one or two things that you think are critical concerns, well, critical issues that need to be at the table in terms of coming out of this, how to prepare our people better than perhaps we have thus far.
Well, maybe I'll jump in. Education is your perennial, is always at the table in good times and in bad. I think now it's more so now than ever, because we will more than likely have to do a fair amount of reskilling in terms of moving across from one sector to another. And in a space where education has been an issue for Cayman for decades, it's going to be, I think, difficult to deal with the moving people across sectors. But like with everything else, we're just going to have to figure it out. We're going to have to make it work. But we're going to have to put resources in terms of helping to do training, and businesses are going to have to be patient with employees as they kind of get themselves to the table to where they need to be. And then you just have that sector of society that's always going to need assistance. So we're going to have to figure that out as well, because more than likely they can't get on the employment hamster wheel, because they just kind of. So there's a lot to be considered in that. I think education is a huge one, and it would really be an amazing opportunity for us to really wrap our heads around the education space, because that's one that just over time we have not won that battle, and it would be great if we could start making some positive steps to winning that. And you know, then it's balancing our Caymanian and expat community. I think that's going to create quite a bit of challenge for us, in that, you know, as Caymanians really start to become unemployed, and I say that because though they may have been unemployed from March, they were getting paid. Majority of them, not necessarily everybody, but and government stepped in where they had to in the early days. I think in large part businesses were doing the right thing sort of through April into May, but those that haven't been opened back up yet are going to struggle. So you'll have more sort of marching on to that sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 people that are out of jobs. And then it's balancing making sure the Caymanians get to the table, the employment table. Well, what do you do with those work permits? That's going to be it's always a tricky situation. And then if we open up our borders again and people need to get back to work, well, then do we have enough people to put the island back to work properly? So in this environment, there's no easy answers. There's no silver bullets to anything. And anybody who's looking for government or the private sector to fix all of those things, again, is fooling themselves, because that's not how life is. There's a myriad of solutions that we need to come up with together to get through it. But those are two big ones, but I really hope that we land on the education page and really start to get that right.
Woody, thank you for that. And just to add to that, because that is an area of significant interest and concern on my part, but that we reframe the very word education in the local context to not simply be pre-K to 12, but rather we're looking at retraining adults, internships, apprenticeships, looking at stepping way outside the box to look at a range of opportunities by way through which we can meet as many of our people as possible. So the education solution, long in coming, but I think this is a brilliant opportunity, as you said, for there to be some reframing and really getting outside the box and looking at how do we do this effectively. The other part of that is the always tenuous Cayman expat kind of dialogue. And that again is something that I think we need to continue to manage sensitively and respectfully in both directions. But Rev, I turn to you and Alex to comment.
I wanted to just maybe raise and that I think one of the things going forward that might need to be engaged is the morality and ethics that inform economic models. You know, what are those things that are going to help us to create a better situation, so that we can avert future catastrophes or so on like this, or manage them, or not be in a better position. And this is a conversation not just for Cayman I'm talking just globally and overall, because I think that this pandemic is both a product of the economic catastrophe, but it's also, or rather, it has created, the pandemic has become a product of the economic disasters that we've had, on issues that we've had, but also it has spurred on the current economic disaster even more. So it is on both ends of it, you know, things like just debt, and how countries have been, especially poorer countries, the global people, countries in the global south and so on, have been, you know, treated and dealt with economically, and therefore made it very difficult for them to be able to do some of the things that we were talking about, the education, the training, the healthcare, and all the things that make for that. Some of the greed that went into the 2008 economic meltdown in the United States and around the world. You know, things are like around ineffective governance and so on, and other kinds of things like corruption, and those kinds of things that have impacted that. And not to take away things about how we treat the earth, you know, living as if, you know, we have, the earth is just, it has all of the resources we'll ever need for a gazillion amount of years ad infinitum, and without thinking about how all of the things that we do have impacted some of these things. And those people who are the scientists tell us that because of how we live in the world, it has created the very crucible for these kinds of viruses and so on to move over from animal to human beings and so on. So my point is about how we're going to engage the whole world, but ourselves, to think about what are some of the things that inform how we do business, what are the things that are going to be in the best interest of all, of the whole community. And I say that against the backdrop, you know, of the fact that the bottom half of the world's population owns about the same amount of wealth as probably the top 10 men in the world. You know, so you're talking about that kind of a disparity and so on. And so therefore, there is a sense in which we have to think, I think we have to think about these things. And again, I'm no economist or anything like that, so I don't know what it will mean, but we have to start to ask those questions and then make those decisions around how we organize ourselves so that can inure for our benefit.
No, Alex, you didn't get a chance to comment on that.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with what Reverend Myers was saying, and I think, especially in light of events going on in countries close around us as well, I think the importance of respect and compassion and kindness are going to be huge going forward. I agree that I think that the economic situation mixed with the pandemic has created a really interesting environment where it seems like really anything is possible at this stage from what I've seen from the news around the world. And so I think it's really important for us to keep in mind the importance of how we interact and how we treat not only ourselves, but the people around us as well. Not just on a personal level, but community-wide. And I am going to jump on as well with what Mr. Foster said about education. I teach as well myself, and so that's something very close to my heart as well, and what I really see as the big game changer, especially for Caymanians, but anyone for the future. Education would bring in not only opportunities in the workforce, but just the personal and the emotional capacities that come with higher education. You know, with the education, you do have more flexibility for different jobs. It's easier to make a transition within the workforce, things like going from in-person to Zoom. You've just got a lot more resources and a lot more capabilities that have been developed through not only the formal education, but the experience of going through that as well, the responsibilities and the different social and developmental parts that come with it as well. So I think education really is the big thing for moving forward. It empowers a person, it gives them more, not only more knowledge, but more control in their life, right? That's, I think Mr. Woody had asked where the toilet paper comes from. We try to control as much as we can around us, but you are able to do more with more education. And I think Ms. Angela, you'd actually talked about the importance of not only looking at high school, working at UCJCI for the past several years. That's been my big argument, is that Caymanians no longer need to look for an associate's to be the college degree. You know, I really want Caymanians to have the same expectations that expats come in with, of looking at the 4-year degree. I think if you enter school anticipating 4 years and a bachelor's degree as the end goal for that, it's a much different mindset than going in for an associate's for 2 years. And so that's, you know, that's my hope for Cayman, is that Caymanians begin to expect more of themselves and know that we are capable of it. You know, we've seen from our heritage just how strong and resilient a people we are, from our religious background, our seafaring background, our development in tourism and banking that's put us on the global level. There's so much that Caymanians have to offer. There's no reason that we shouldn't be able to take advantage of that in our own country. So I'm definitely supportive of education from a mental health perspective as well. With the increased problem-solving skills that come with education, you're better able to deal with things. You're better able to understand things. But from the mental health side, a lot of us in the field have been doing a lot of work around just basic awareness and understanding. It's been so heavily stigmatized in Cayman for so many years. It's something that we don't talk about. So I do a lot of work with domestic violence as well. I do a lot of things that we don't talk about. And these are things that Cayman needs to start talking about more. I think the government has recognized that and has made some steps for it, which is how we got the mental health helpline, which has been awesome. We've got the counseling centers. We've actually got free counseling services available through the government, which is available to anyone who lives here, which is great. I've worked several places throughout the US and I've never seen anything like that before. But it's helping people understand common reactions to stress, right? A lot of us are going through stress reactions right now. Our bodies are tense from living in this constant uncertainty. We are going to be more irritable. We are going to have difficulty sleeping. We might have changes in appetite going up or down. It's harder to focus. We're not being as productive as we used to be able to be or that we want to be. And that these are normal reactions. And it's okay to not be okay sometimes. So I think helping the Caymanian population understand that, and that if it is to the point where it's overwhelming or you're not able to meet your responsibilities like you used to, it's okay to ask for help and to know where to go to get them as well. So oftentimes I'm talking to people and people are surprised when I talk about free counseling services that are available. But you know, basic understanding of what anxiety is with the stress response within the body, what depression is as far as like, you know, the low mood and the changes in appetite and sleeping and everything like I talked about for a couple of weeks, and that people go through this. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental illness. So this is not something that's far-fetched or completely removed from the everyday experience. It's okay. If it's not you, it's a loved one or someone close to you who's been through it. And that's all right. And there's people here who can help, right? Whether you go straight to the mental health system or even starting talking with your pastor, your GP, it's okay. There's no wrong way or there's no right way either to be able to get help. And there's a lot of people out there that are able to help. And so I think from the mental health perspective, it's understanding it, knowing it's okay to talk about it, whether it's you going through it or you just wanting to know more about it, and that there's help available, a lot of help actually available here on island. And overseas as well, if anyone has questions about that. Any of us are also happy to talk about that too.
One of the things that I, as I was listening to you all, that I heard, is that we are very fortunate here in Cayman that there's much that is available. But very often I find myself equally concerned because all that is available, you've just demonstrated that access to what is available is another issue. Because if people aren't able to understand and the types of services that are available,
right,
they don't see them as being accessible to them. And so I offer that as something that we can think about as we look at how we come out of this, ensuring that our people see themselves with access to what is available, rather than those who create services simply say there are services that are available.
And if I may,
as we begin to kind of,
if I may just add there, Ms. Martin, sorry, and that it's okay to get help. There's a lot of people who are afraid to be seen, to go and get help. And I think to know how I have many friends in this field and all of us are busy. Many people are getting help and it's okay. And there's no shame in asking for help. Just like you go to a doctor for a headache, it's okay to come to a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist if you're having emotional difficulties. And there's no shame in it. Actually, I think it takes a lot of courage to ask for help, and I commend anyone who does. So if I may just add that to what you said.
Well, you know, it's not just those that are scared to get help. A lot of people feel that they're weak if they do. That, you know, you grow up tough or you grow up whatever, and if I go to the doctor, then I'm not manly or whatever. So there's all that pride and all that goes into it as well.
True.
I think all of that, what you're saying really speaks to the fact that this pandemic maybe demonstrates something about us, we have kind of shared commitments. We have, we all are part of the same world. We live in the same space. We have to share the same economy. We have the same social space. All of these things, and I think sometimes maybe people think that there's just so much of a difference between us than there actually is. That people have very similar responses. Yeah, I might be dealing with $100 over here, and somebody else is dealing with a little bit more, or so on. But the fact is that we have some similar things around it, and that should help us to know that that's what community is. That's what community is. Not about everybody coming in, with all exact same things, but there are some commonalities around us, and therefore it helps us to deal with it.
We entered the pandemic with no idea what to expect. We've come through the 10 or 12 weeks, and what he shared, we still really don't know, are we actually coming out? Where are we in the scheme of things? We've identified there are some things that we think, that we feel strongly about that can impact what the new normal, the new ahead will look like. A lot of that we've said focuses around education, and heard you and Rev Myers very clearly, Alexandra, around that business about developing a comfortableness with oneself to seek help for all those things that we're seen as not socially acceptable, anything within the context of person, emotional issues, whatever they may be, that get called mental health issues. What are some of the things that you think we need to have in our community toolkit if we're going to be able to make the kind of adjustments we need to make? What's that resolve look like, sound like from where you sit?
Oh, that's quite the question. Community resolve. Well, I mean, economy has to play a part in getting through this. Because whether you have your own job or you're getting support from government, or from somewhere else, the private sector is also stepping up significantly in terms of helping people. So it's coming back to what we talked about post Ivan, where everybody sort of worked together. This is just I'll use some bad English here as we're talking about education, a bigger, badder problem. But together between government and private sector coming back and helping people to get through this, because we can't give everyone a job, because right now there's just simply not enough going on. Even those businesses that get back to work, restaurants are starting to open up again. There's not enough money in the system, and people still aren't back to work, or whatever their case may be. They're not coming out of their homes because they're still nervous. Restaurants aren't filling up like they did, let's say, in February at the height of the season. So in large part, I would say that businesses that are able to open and still able to function are really going to do so from the standpoint of just making payroll and keeping their business afloat, as opposed to thinking about making a profit. Even in our own business, where everybody say, well, we must be loving this because everybody has to eat. Yeah, that's true. And we haven't closed at all, save for the 2 days of lockdown that we were forced to close for. Every other day we've been open. However, our sales are down, our payroll is up, expenses are up, prices have rose, and we haven't matched those. We haven't changed our pricing to match the increased pricing, so our gross profit is down. So from a profitability standpoint, it's not wonderful, but we're better than most. So I only say that to say that even with the economy getting back to quote unquote some semblance of normal, it's not what it was in February by any stretch of the imagination. So we still have a lot of resolve in terms of surviving the next 6, 8, 9, 12 months together through private sector funding, the food bank, or ARC, or any of those other entities that have popped up. We have people that are just opening up their kitchens and cooking lasagna and delivering it to ARC. And we have, all kinds of people doing all kinds of wonderful, amazing things. and food is an easy one, but who is taking care of homelessness? Because there was homelessness before, there's systemic homelessness, but now all of a sudden there is pop-up homelessness. People that are out of a job who, you know, they've been kicked out of their apartment because they don't have the money to pay rent. There's no charities that really deal with that. The only ones that deal with that really is government. So all of a sudden now you have a whole bunch of people that are living in their cars. So there's a lot going on that we're having to deal with that we didn't really have to deal with before, or in other crises, whether it was the economic meltdown of 2008 or the Ivan back in 2004. We didn't really have to deal with those type of things. Now all of a sudden we're dealing with much bigger, much larger, much plethora of problems. So, you know, wearing my R3 hat as we try to figure out, well, how do we best help? The easy one is food, but when you start to ask the question of, well, who needs help and what do you need help with, all of a sudden now there's a whole bunch of different things. Is who's going to pay my rent, who's going to pay my health insurance, who's going to take care of you know, whatever the case may be. There's businesses that need to try and stay afloat so they can make payroll. You know, the mental health thing comes up often, but how do we help in the mental health space? You know, that's a tricky one. You know, how do we help with that? So we're thinking, well, do we just get volunteers and have them man the hotline? I don't know. And then as we march on, you know, May turned to June, and June is going to turn into July. What happens? So I really think that, you know, we need to open up dialogue, and we need to communicate. I think communication is really important. And I'm not sure that we're doing enough communication in terms of planning for this, because I think maybe people are uncertain of how to plan, so they don't, and just playing it, you know, by the seat of their pants. But I don't know that that's the right thing. I think you have to plan and just change as you need to change. And so in so doing so, we can start to spread the money better. Because one thing that we're worried about in the charity space is that we've had so many amazing people just spending money on buying food cards or gift cards so people can get food, or supporting the food bank or ARC or whoever. It's been amazing. Like, it's truly been amazing. But if we have to do this for another 6 months, will the money run out? What happens?
I'm hearing, Woody, a call for a level of flexibility and agility that we're not well known for, and an openness in conversation with all the parties together, not sort of some parties. So we can begin to look at the whole person, not the employee. I think that's probably the best way I can say it, because the mental health issue is part of the whole person. And if the mental health issue doesn't get attention, I suppose it's an easy way for that person to, you no longer have a job with us. But that has created a whole bunch of other problems. So I just add that to the mix. The whole question of the presence of the church in the context of this conversation in community, the need to demythicize the whole mental health world, and the business around retooling, reskilling, and improving the possibilities for Caymanians, but equally an acknowledgement that we currently, where we are today, will never be able, I shouldn't say will never, I cannot fill all the jobs that will come back online. And so living together in harmony with expatriates in our community. Rev, I see you nodding, so you've got some thoughts.
I was just going to think that my tool was not so much of a real tool. It doesn't have a lot of steel and metal in it, but probably more an ear tool. But really is the point that everybody has been making so far, is a tool around remembering that we are interdependent. That really we're connected, and that whatever we're experiencing is something that we are all experiencing together, and however we're going to come out of it is going to have to take all of us to do so. And sometimes there's a sense of, especially when I'm in need, I'm looking for help from somewhere, and perhaps some sort of a sense of an obligation that somebody else, you know, must be or should be able to. But there needs to be me looking for assistance where I am, recognizing that I'm also in a space where even that other person or that other entity that may be able to stretch a hand out to me within a particular way also has their own set of challenges and own set of needs. And I think it's about living in the community. And so for me, my one word for all of this conversation is really about re-engaging community, what it means to live in community. And I think that part of what modern life has taught us is that we isolate even before this isolation, because we never needed this to isolate. The truth is that we pop in our cars, we get to where we're going, we do what we're doing in our little spaces, and then we go back home, and we don't have to interact with anybody else. We don't have to, you know, or we have a very limited space in which we do so. Now that we're forced to, it is a big problem. But the point is, that's how we are. This has really taught us, or is teaching us, and I think what is going to be a tool, as well as perhaps one of the blessings that come out of it, is that re-engagement of that sense of who we are as community, and that we really depend on each other and should depend on each other.
Alex?
Yeah, actually, in thinking about this earlier, the two things that had come up to me first were, as we talked about earlier, respect and compassion, and rebuilding the community. But I think to add to the discussions we've already had, the first one would be patience. Patience with ourselves, right? It took a while for us to adjust to working at home. It's going to take us a while to readjust to working back in the office with the new measures in place. Patience with the people around us, that everyone else's stress levels are high too. Everyone else is confused and frustrated and scared and whatever, all the feels, you know, all of that is going on for everyone around us. So patience with the people around us, and patience with the government as well. They're doing their best to try to figure it out every 2 weeks, you know, what the next step will be, what that's going to look like, and then dealing with issues as they come up, right? Because, you know, as Mr. Foster said, you make a decision, but, you know, then you have to act in the moment with what's coming up. I say patience with ourselves and the people around us. And I think Ms. Martins actually had said it with the flexibility and adaptability. You know, with this, things are going to be different. And so I'd say, rather than going back to how we've always done things, looking for new ways of doing things. And that requires some of the patience as well, rather than just kind of jumping to do things like how you assume it should be done. Taking time to consider new ways of doing things and new options.
But Alex, it allowed me to raise an issue that I just want to put on the table. We've talked about education, and we've talked about online learning and re-engaging community, and undercutting all of that is, how do we get the conversation going again? And I just want to throw it out that one of the huge pieces is, how do we, all of this will be possible, I want to suggest to you all, with first world internet capacity across our islands, because the very internet that we have is impacting this Zoom forum and on a number of occasions, no fault of any of ours. And so I just throw that out there as something that's really critical in the scheme of all of the ongoing dialogue for emerging, is the matter around not internet for, remember, availability and access. Those are two very important words for me. The business of access of high quality internet across the 3 islands. Friends, it's been a really interesting discussion. And I think there are a lot of things that we talked about tonight that when our listening, when we share this forum throughout our social media and other spaces, that people will connect with, whether it's the expression Woody had when he said, I don't know what I thought, to you, Rev, talking about the whole business of the uncertainty and the anxiety and the tension people are feeling. And again, the psychologist saying, we thought we were ready. We thought they were going to come to us in droves, but they didn't. And obviously all of the kinds of issues that people in this community have been facing, whether it's, and one of the things we didn't even acknowledge, it's not the homeschooling alone, but mothers with children at home and no helpers. And helpers aren't yet allowed back into homes. So what kind of stress that brings to the table. I want to say thank you, but I want to offer each of you 1 minute to wrap it up from your perspective.
Who goes first? We flip. Well, I'd like to say also thank you for the opportunity. You know, this environment, shall we call it, has really been an interesting environment. It gives us an opportunity to test who we are as a people and as a country in terms of how do we face adversity and how do we overcome and how do we deal with that. And this is as big a problem as we hope to ever see in our lifetime. Thankfully, it didn't come with sickness and death, but it easily could have. So I am truly thankful for, well, from the flesh and bones perspective, I'm truly thankful for the steps that the government made in those early days. I'll tell you, I do not know that if I were in charge of this country, that I would have made those bold steps at the very beginning, because we were at the forefront of making those tough decisions. And I give the government props for that. And now they're having to make different decisions, but I'm just really thankful that we made the decisions that we did in those early days, and that for whatever reason, even those amount of positives that we had, everybody's been largely healthy. And I'm really, really thankful for that, because with our health, we can overcome most things. We're still going to have our mental health problems, and we're still going to have to figure out where we're going to get paid from, but we have a huge opportunity to survive this and survive this well. We are very fortunate as a country to be living in the country that we're living in. And the decades of good management of our country has put us in a great position to overcome this situation. Though nobody's saying it's going to be easy, we're in as good a place as we could have been in. So I'm thankful for health, and I'm thankful for this country and for being able to survive this madness with the people that I'm able to survive it with.
Great. Alex?
I would say that everyone is feeling the pressure now, different pressures now than we had initially, but just to be patient with yourself, take time for yourself, make time for things that you enjoy, and to give yourself some time to decompress and make sense of things as we're moving through this progression back to opening up. And so if you are feeling stressed, that there are resources out there available through the mental health helpline at 1-800-534-6463, the counseling center 949-8789. A lot of employers also have employee assistance programs where they will actually pay for counseling. If your employer doesn't, they will often have someone that they refer to, or they can help you find someone. Talk to your doctor, talk to your pastor. There's no wrong way to ask for help. So whoever you trust, whoever's closest to you, start there. But there's a lot of people out there. We're all going through a lot right now, but we are all in this together. And there's a lot of people out there who can help.
I come from a perspective where my own hope really is rooted in how I see God working in the world. When God created the world, the story of creation tells me that he said this is good. And so I'm part of something that God thinks is a great thing. And therefore I celebrate that I am a part of that. Now I know it's not always a great day, it's not always a great time. We don't always do great things. And the truth is that we have to acknowledge when there is brokenness, and brokenness always have consequences. It's one. but this is God's idea. And I think if I take that approach, then it says to me that I have, as part of the gift of being part of this, the opportunity then to go to God and to hear from God a little sense of, okay, how might I work towards fixing? You know, how might I go back to the builder and then ask for a little bit of help in fixing? And a lot of times, those are just little spaces that we have to come back to. And I think this place gives us that opportunity to reconnect with that, to see what was the whole purpose of humanity? Why are we here? How are we meant to live with each other? What is the best situation that creates the best possibilities for all of us? And when we re-engage that conversation, I think then we start to emerge with some things that help us to become hopeful. So today is not the last day, thankfully. It is a day that I can see where I am, look at what has led me here, and maybe make some determinations about the place I want to go, and looking for the help to get to that place. So for me, that is where hope comes from. And as you both have said, there are just so many tremendous things within our community that help me to remain hopeful. The leadership of our political and other civil and so on community, that leadership makes me hopeful. The availability of people like Dr. Alex and others who are seeking to offer that, and the many other persons that you've spoken about who are making food available and so on. We in the church have found people who come outside and say, how can we help in doing this and help you to do that? And that has been tremendous as well. So there's just a lot of positive things that are available. And so I think it's, again, let us stop and figure out, okay, where are we and where do we need to go? And find some of that strength that we need in order to move to the next place. Because I think this can only mean something better. Because if God meant for this to be good, then God in Jesus Christ brings a possibility for recreation of the world. And one of the verses in Scripture that encourages me is that God has offered for fullness of life to all. It's not only about a pie in the sky dream about later on. It's about right here. How do we live full, meaningful, and complete lives together in as part of community?
Great. I really want to thank each of you. We put this forum together, and we had a format, and I just love the way what it started. Who said I didn't know it was going to go on. We thought, at least I thought I knew what was going to happen. But as we have moved along tonight, we really keep coming back to the essence of what it means to be human. The essence of what it means to live in community, and the attributes that each of us are required to live out. And I think that this has been a really rich space. There's a sense, as I've been listening to each of you, a really rich space of blending the different perspectives that you bring, but recognizing at the end of the day, we are really one. We are really one, and therefore it is with that coming together and that shared voice that we are able to forge that path. Although we're not sure where we are right yet, if we're coming out or not, but whenever we sort of able to get up off the stool and move forward, that we have a common we have a consensus around what it means. What will that quality of life be like that we want to move towards? How will we redefine community for Cayman? So I want to thank each of you, and to say that tonight, I hope for each one of us is merely a beginning of a conversation. Thanks again, and God bless each of you.
Yeah,
Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks for having us.